Good morning. Let's call the to order the Administration and Finance Committee. Could I get a roll call, please?
Yes. Dr. Bophy? Present. Dr. Bophy is present. Mr. Davis?
Present.
Mr. Davis is present. Ms. Edmonston? Ms. Edmonston is present. Sorry. Mr. Garvey? Here. Mr. Garvey is present. Ms. Holloway? Present. Ms. Holloway is present. Dr. Jones?
Present.
Dr. Jones is present. Ms. Lewis?
Present.
Ms. Lewis is present. Ms. Orange Jones?
Present.
Ms. Orange Jones is present. Mr. Rock?
Present.
Mr. Rock is present. Dr. Thomason?
Present.
Dr. Thomason is present. Ms. Bartier?
Here.
Ms. Bartier is present. You have a quorum.
Thank you. What's our first item of business?
Your consent agenda is ready for approval, adding items 6.1 and 7.1 and pulling item 2.2.
Can I get a motion? You have a question
I'll
point?
make a motion, but then I have a question.
Okay, so have a motion. Need a second, please?
Second.
Second, Ms. Lewis. And Ms. Mosher, you had a question on this?
Yes, as I've gone through these particular contracts and all, that are under the 50,000, it would be very helpful for me if, in the source of funding that I know most of them are federal funds, if we could cite the federal program from which it comes, whether it be Title I monies or Title II monies or Circle or 21st Century or whatever the funding source would be, it would be very helpful. And I would hope that at some point, and I guess that might be in the new cycle possibly, that we have some discussion and maybe information about the types of activities that we're using some of these funds for in general. It would be helpful for me as I go through this to understand that. So I would like if, from this point forward, if we could do that source of funding from the programs, and at some point then have that discussion whenever that would be.
That would be good additional information.
I have
Is that noted? That point?
I'm just curious about the new federal education law and if we're going to continue to divide the funding up into different titles. I understand that there's a desire to do consolidated state plans and consolidating the funding, and so I'm just curious if we're going to continue to think about funding by programs, or if as we work through implementing this law, if we're going to move away from that.
Well, most of the funding here is Title I. There is probably some Title II and IDEA in this as well. But the consolidations that have taken place at the federal level under the new law are not consolidations of titles. They're consolidations of programs within titles.
Right.
So it's primarily a large consolidation within Title I. Therefore, I think the level of detail that Ms. Voce is asking for is just at the title level, and that's what we'll provide.
Excellent. Thank you. Any other board comments or concerns? Not having any? Are there objections to the motion? No objections. The motion passes. What's our next item?
Your first item is on page 2, item 2.2, consideration of LDE contracts of 50,000 and under approved by the State Superintendent of Education. The recommendation is to receive.
I'm going to need a motion a motion for 2.2 to receive. So moved, Ms. Holloway. A second. Second by Mr. Rock. And I do have one comment card. If I could have you go ahead and come up. Dr. Finney, and do we have anything from the board while he's on his way up? If not, then we'll hear from Dr. James Finney. Good morning. Please state your name and go at it.
Good morning. My name is James Finney. I would just like to suggest that once these contracts are approved, that they and other existing contracts be posted in digital format on the department's website, therefore reducing the need for public record requests that might overwhelm the department's legal staff. And also it would be useful if there was always available to the public an itemization of how much had been spent on each of those contracts. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
May I just ask a quick question of staff? I don't need to speak with you, Dr. Finney. Am I right that the Division of Administration posts all contracts online, as the division is the regulator of contracts? All contracts entered into by the state are posted on the Office of Contracts and Procurement's webpage, I believe. for public review. Is that not right? I want to make sure that I'm right about that. Everyone is posted. So while I appreciate Dr. Finney's request, I do want you to know, members, that all of these contracts are ultimately regulated by the Division of Administration, which posts them online on their website.
Duly noted. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I thank you, Superintendent, for letting us know. So, Mr. Finney, I just would like for you to know as well that there is a place that you can see those contracts. Okay, thank you, and I appreciate feedback. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, no comments, any objections? With no objections, motion passes. Next item, please.
Next item is on page 84, item 4.1, consideration of a discussion of the MFE formula. Recommendation is to receive.
Could I get a motion, please? Moved by Dr. Bophy, second by Ms. Boucher. And I also need to call up Dr. James Finney for a comment card. While he's coming up, are there any comments from the board?
Training that the region provided?
We are not allowed to go to some of the trainings that they do have. Some of the trainings is specifically for New Orleans area. It's not for Jefferson Parish.
Any other questions from the board?
Well, I just wanted to know if that's the same pool of money. If she's not allowed, is that, can you verify that, John?
But you are allowed to go to the ones in Jefferson Parish, correct?
Yes, you are allowed to go to one of the
Are the people in New Orleans allowed to go to the ones in Jefferson Parish?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. So it sounds like it's just segmented by
By parishes, that's correct.
Okay.
All right. Thank you very much. We appreciate your time today.
Kathy, I just wanted to let Kathy know that Jim and I have been in conversation with Jefferson.
Right. So
Thank you.
they're talking there. Board, I think, if I recall correctly, sorry, Ms. Boucher?
I just have a couple of quick questions on these contracts. I was just
Okay.
waiting my turn. I'm looking at the two on pages 128, 129, and these are, I guess, auditing of the scholarship program, and we're looking at about 1.7 or 1.8 million dollars. And the funding source is state. What state monies? Does that come out of the scholarship program monies, or is there
Yes.
specials
Yes.
out of the 44 million?
Yes.
We take 2 million off to audit the program?
State General Fund.
So, but it comes out of that allocation fund?
I believe it does and always has come out of that line in the budget. It's an administrative amount.
Seems like an awful lot of money to do that
Well, it's
audit.
150 schools, and you're doing an in-depth audit of 150 organizations. This has been the source of much discussion over the years because the schools have not, understandably, said that they could afford it themselves to bear the burden of that audit. The state has taken on that audit since the program's inception.
Okay, whereas other schools have to do their own audits. But anyway, the other question I have on 134, the mental health services provided by Tulane, which is really good, you know, from what I'm looking at. This is just for the child care centers for the preschool?
This is, the Tulane one is for child care centers.
Just
yes.
only child care
Yes.
centers. We could sure use that for our preschool as well. And then my last one.
I believe that the funding stream that's because of the funding stream. It's
that's the child care monies?
CCDF, yeah.
Yeah, because I'm looking at it at the top. All right, and just lastly, on 139, I think Ms. Reynolds alluded to the educational interpreters, and this is to train 20 people for it in 3 school districts. Could you tell me what 3 school districts that covers?
Do we know which 3 school systems are covered by the Lighthouse grant?
You can just get me the information later. I don't need it right at this moment. I mean, but this is something that all all districts really need. It's very difficult to find qualified educational interpreters, and if there is money that is appropriated for training, I'd like to see it expanded beyond just 3 districts, if that intends to be one of the priorities. So I was just wondering, how that came about, that we're looking at just 3 districts.
I think this is a continuation of a longstanding thing, but yes, understood and something to be discussed.
Dr. Jones? Getting ready to vote.
Okay, could we take a look at page 125 for just a second? It's a procedural question. I'm sure John's got an answer real quick for me. The category that we're considering here is contracts over $50,000, but I note the contract amount on that one is $5,000, and the contract actually expires next week, at the end of next week. Is there some reason why that's in that
I
50,000?
believe this is just an amendment to a pre-existing service.
If you notice the top right, under the new contract or amendment, it references amendment number 3.
Yeah.
So this is basically to pay the bill that's due by the end of next week, essentially?
Correct.
Okay. All right, thanks.
All right, now, members, I think and help me make sure I'm on this, I believe the motion we have is Dr. Jones' motion to approve all but the contract on page 153. So we could.
I want to amend that motion.
Okay.
The motion is just to approve all the contracts.
So your motion would be to approve all contracts. It stands there. Again, Ms. Hall, I think you had seconded that, or who was the second on that? Dr.
I'm sorry. Motion was Dr. Garvey.
Oh, that's right. What's my motion?
Yeah.
I just amended Mr. Garvey's motion, and I know he doesn't even care.
Mr. Garber, can I just get some kind of notice that says you're okay down there with that? All right, so the motion to the board at this time is to approve contracts on item 5.3. No other discussion?
Chairman, that is with the understanding that the audience, the people, the providers in the audience understand there's recourse.
That's right, and some have already taken advantage of that.
Okay, thank you.
Do I hear any objections to that motion? With no objections, that motion passes. Next item, please.
On page 195, item 5.4, consideration of federal and state grants and allocations to LEAs, Type 2 charters, Type 5 charters, approved non-public schools, and community-based organizations, competitive and other. The recommendation is to approve.
Do I have a motion from the board to approve?
So moved.
So moved by Dr. Jones. Second by Ms. Holloway. I have a note here. It says that before we move into discussion or vote, Ms. Vaucher, Ms. Holloway, or Ms. Emerson may want to recuse themselves.
Yes.
Is that right, Ms. Holloway? You're good with that? And Ms. Edmondson? Okay.
Just from
So please let the record reflect those 3 recusals from this. Superintendent, you have something to add to it?
Yes, I do. Thank you. These are the result of either of grants that have been approved already, and you are now, or accepted by the department, you are essentially planning for the allocation of these funds to particular schools and school systems. I would say that all of these reflect longstanding and ongoing programmatic commitments, other than the expansion of the Jobs for America's Graduate Program, which the governor has made a commitment to increasing from what it currently is, which is slightly above 60 high schools across the state, to more than 100. The state has, through his office, identified funds available for that expansion. And so that expansion reflects the most significant new commitment on this list of allocations. Most of the funding for the initiatives that we're discussing here today, because they are grant funds, are not state funds, but they're federal funds. And as I said before, most of them reflect longstanding programs and the allocations for next school year.
Do I have any comments from the board before we vote? With no comments, do I have any objections to the motion? With no objection, the motion passes. Next item, please.
Next item is on page 281, item 6.2, consideration of a report from Education Finance staff concerning Type 5 charter school budgets and expenditure reports, including irregularities or concerns. Recommendation is to receive.
This is a report to receive, moved by Dr. Bofi, second by Ms. Owens-Jones. Do I have any discussion from the board? Any objections to the motion? With no objections, motion passes. Next item, please.
On page 288, item 6.3, consideration of RSD contracts and leases of $50,000 and over. Recommendation is to approve.
So moved.
Ms. Boucher moves, second by Mr. Rock. Any discussion from the board on this item? Hearing no discussion, any objection to the motion? With no objection, motion passes. Next item, please.
On page 294, item 6.4, consideration of a review of the 2016-2017 budget for the Recovery School District. Recommendation is to receive.
Do I have a motion to receive? Dr. Bofi, I need a second. Mr. Orange-Jones?
If I may,
Superintendent?
I'm going to ask Superintendent Dobar just to speak on this item briefly, Mr. Chairman. Members, just to give you a little bit of context, however, you are receiving a budget at this stage that we will ultimately bring to you for approval on a timeline that is roughly the same as the timelines that other school systems ask their boards for approval. I do think it's important that Superintendent Dobar have a chance to discuss with you the Recovery School District's expenditures, as it is a unique school system. For the volume of schools, it doesn't have much overhead because most of the schools within the RSD are themselves LEAs. So they receive 98%, give or take, of the funds that otherwise would go to the school system and then for allocation within the school system. So I'm going to ask Superintendent Dobar to present on that with the understanding that he will then be bringing this back for your approval, likely, I believe, at the next meeting.
In August, yes.
Yep.
Thank you, Superintendent.
Go ahead, Superintendent.
Mr. Chair, committee members, Patrick Dobar, Superintendent, Louisiana Recovery School District. And as Superintendent White mentioned, this is per Bulletin 129. We are to submit a proposed budget to the board prior to hopeful approval in August. And I just wanted to take a moment just to share a few things about it for some of the members, for all of the members, but particularly those of you who are new, and so you can understand the process and what we've done. Over the last several years, the Recovery School District, we have dramatically restructured and streamlined our budget and our organization in order to more effectively support the transformation of our low-performing schools. About 7 or so years ago, and it was recent as 5 years ago when I was first named superintendent, we still had a number of direct-run schools where we saw a much larger budget. But every year that we've either closed direct runs or phased out and we no longer direct-run schools, we made certain to try to keep a budget that, as the superintendent pointed out, runs very lean and efficiently. The majority of that is off of the administration fee that are charged to charter schools. And what we see is that, we've just tried to make certain that since we do no longer direct run schools, that still our role is to provide services from a government perspective that helps to enhance the system, particularly in New Orleans, but also in Baton Rouge of a decentralized state of schools. And so our budget reflects our values, where we highly stress to make certain that we have equity for all students, that we have a diverse system of schools and programs for our student populations, and that we also focus on the preservation of our school facilities, namely in New Orleans. And so what you will see is that we have a total proposed budget of $236 million. Of that, the construction budget for RSD is about $216.9 million, and then our operational/instructional budget is about $18.6 million. Again, the majority of that budget is obviously the construction that we're doing in New Orleans around the schools recovery from Hurricane Katrina. And so when you take out the school facility master plan construction, again, it is an operating budget of $18.6 million. Of that, we have the charter admin fee is about $4.5 million, and this is basically used for staffing, for insurance, and others, just central office costs, rent, supplies, that sort of thing. Another revenue source is the Harris Fund in New Orleans that we received, $6.3 million from Harris. So this is a flow through from the city of New Orleans. And basically we use that for maintenance and repairs, a small amount for maintenance and repairs of facilities. That was his original intent several years ago. But we work with the City Council of New Orleans as well as OPSB, and the majority of the dollars go to the support of our staffs at the Youth Opportunity Center and the Therapeutic Day Program, of which I'm proud to say that both of those are doing extremely well, and they're all part of the unification process as we work on the transfer of these services. We get some general fund dollars from the state. This year it's going to be about $801,000, and this is a subsidy for the Office of Risk Management Insurance Legacy Costs. So that number was several million years ago, and then basically it's on a lag from legacy costs for facilities and insurance costs in New Orleans. And what we've been able to work out is that because we're a state agency, 2 to 3 years ago, great kudos to our team, we were able to work with Office of Risk Management, and I applaud them as well, in order to get our schools to be able to use the state rate regarding insurance. And so that $800,000 is down significantly from, I believe it may have been about 3 or 4 million several years ago. And you see this gradually going away to where it'll be zero in probably 2 to 3 years. And so very small amount from state general fund. Again, we have some FEMA and insurance proceeds, which is about 1.7 million. And then we have budget authority from other interagency transfers and grants totaling about 5.3 million. And so I'll just stop there because I know that oftentimes it's important to know what the revenue sources are. I will make myself available and my team available over the next several weeks prior to hopeful an approval of this in August. So if you want to go a little deeper into it, I'm happy to take questions now. I'll be glad to do so. But again, I just want to really thank our team and thank the department's finance team for helping us work through this. And I really feel like it is a model budget that we've been able to be efficient, be able to take on all the transformations over the last several years and still provide quality services, not only to our schools, but to our young people.
Thank you, Superintendent. Are there any questions for the Superintendent from the board?
Yes.
Dr. Jones?
As I look at this, and I see here you've got close to $180 million worth of major repairs. I'm looking at the line third from the bottom in the middle chart. Total of $179,131,000, something like that.
In what?
Of major repairs.
Okay.
Okay. And two things. You're starting to turn a lot of these schools back over to Orleans Parish School over the next couple of years.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And a lot of these major construction projects involved in that $180 million should be coming online or have actually come online, because this is the 2015-16 budget, right? This is last year.
This would be 16-17 approval. I'm not looking at what you have, Dr. Jones, but what I would.
I'm looking at page 295, which says fiscal year 2015.
It's a typo? Okay.
Typo, Dr. Jones.
That's a typo?
Yeah.
Oh, it makes me feel a little better.
Okay. So it should be 16-17.
So in other words, that is next year's budget.
Yes, sir. We're talking about 16-17.
How does that number compare to last year off the top of your head?
I think it's about, it may be close to the same. I think Lona's here. I don't know if she has the actual number. But I believe it's close to the same amount, because a lot of the projects initially got started, a lot of the newer projects and renovations, and that money just sort of carries over. We should be finished. This is one of the areas around school construction that we've been already totally aligned with OPSB. So we're already working out the facility transfers. And part of it, we have to see it through because the majority, really all of the dollars are FEMA dollars. And so we have to, because we're on record as the recipient of it, we have to see all those projects through.
Okay, so that was the question that I was really getting to is that number expected to start going down significantly over the next couple of years?
Yes, as we continue to work our way through the projects. We still have about maybe 5 to 10 new builds. We still have some significant renovations. Our goal is to have them all completed by 2018, and I'll tell you, this time next year, we're going to hit with a number of new buildings coming up, so yes, that number should drop or remain at least close to the same, and then the following year will more than likely drop significantly. So we're getting close to the finish line with those buildings.
Okay, and there should be a significant period after that where those facilities are relatively new, that there shouldn't be nearly the repair burden that's
absolutely. And so that's part of the school preservation fund that the local taxpayers passed the millage roll forward last year, that as we pay down the millage, that we'll use that money for school facilities preservation. Our team is working very closely with OPSB and the Unification Task Force to lay out all of the guidelines, and we want to say that, we've received the blessing from the catastrophe of Katrina to be able to have these new and renovated buildings, but it's our responsibility to make sure that they last for, generations to come. And so that's been a very public conversation that we're having, and we're going to continue to see that through.
Thank you.
1 second, Ms. Evanston. We do have one comment card. Dr. James Finney, if you want to come on down while we finish up here. Ms. Evanston?
Yeah, I was just going to ask, Superintendent, you talked about the legacy cost and the insurance and how you were able to work that with the state, and that's great. But you made the comment that in 2 or 3 years that should be taken care of. How would that happen?
Because what happens is it's that on an annual basis, ORM basically they have an insurance bill that's based off of RSD school properties from the last 5 years. with a 1-year lag in reporting. And so basically we're just paying down those costs, and it's only a year lag. And so in another year or so, because we stopped direct run schools about 3 years ago, that's just going to gradually go away. Okay. And so we won't have buildings where we inherited that legacy cost. We will have paid that cost off. And then, as we mentioned with you, I know yesterday separately we were having that conversation. You know, we worked out legacy costs in New Orleans, not only just on facilities, but on other costs, retirees, and that sort of thing.
Right.
So, you know, as you pay it down on facilities, it's a little bit more concrete on insurance and the fact that we won't be operating those anymore.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else on the board for Superintendent? Thank you, Superintendent. Dr. Finney?
I'm James Finney. As you as a board consider this budget proposal and then at future meetings consider adopting it, I would hope you keep in mind that this is an agency whose function is quickly going to dissipate, and I would hope that the abandonment of the effort to destroy public education in New Orleans doesn't just get transferred wholesale to widen the attack on public education in East Baton Rouge and other parishes, and that you avoid mission drift in the Recovery School District, which has provided a recovery from nothing and has instead accelerated privatization, much to the detriment of the students that are supposed to be served by these schools. So please be on the lookout to make sure that the RSD isn't creating new missions for itself so it can continue to exist and receive funding. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Board, do we have any other discussion on this matter? Hearing no discussion, are there any objections to the motion? With no objection, motion passes and report received. Next item.
On page 314, item 7.2, consideration of 8G funding cycle activities, approval of 8G statewide programs for fiscal year 2016-2017. Recommendation is to approve.
Do I have a motion from the board to approve? Dr. Bophy, a second. Mr. Rock? Any discussion from the board on this matter?
I just have one question. When does the application period start for the new funding? Is there an application process, or when does that start?
Kim Trippo, BESE staff. It's not really an application process for the statewide. Are you regarding the statewide programs? Normally what happens is that in October the budget was approved and the statewide allocation is approximately $10.7 million. They bring their proposals before the board in the months of June, August, and October.
Statewide meaning the LDOE?
The LDE, yes.
Okay.
And now the block portion, their application period will begin. They are starting to put them in now, and they will end probably the end of July.
So the block portion, how much is that?
I'm sorry?
About how much?
It's about 10.7 as well.
Okay,
10.7
so the
million.
block portion is the statewide. Okay.
No. We have a statewide portion, and we have a block portion.
So the total is 10.7.
Clarify that.
No. They each have 10.7 million.
Oh, okay.
Yes. Our total budget for 16-17 is 22.3 million. And the block has 10.7 and statewide has 10.7, and the remaining covers evaluation and administration.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lewis. Any other questions or comments from the board?
Did she identify herself?
For the record, if you would identify on the
Kim
microphone.
Trippo, BESE staff.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
With any other discussion, Ms. Loche?
Just one question. The title of this is Consideration of HE Funding Cycle Activities and Approval of Statewide Programs. You're talking about 10.7 for the statewide. We're approving, I guess, $570,000 of that 10.7.
Correct.
What about the rest of the money? Has any of it been approved so
No.
far? This is the first one?
This is the first of the statewide programs that have been brought before the board.
And the rest of them that go up to the 10.7 will be
Will-
done when?
In August and October.
Okay, and we'll get advance, maybe, Are we going to discuss priorities for that 10.7, or is it just going to come to us? How does that work?
Those priorities were approved with the budget in October of last year.
Okay, so
Keep
they've
in
already
mind, this has been an
set.
ongoing process. We kind of
Right.
walked into an ongoing process, so we'll be looking at this, to be clear, in October of this year for the
For
next
the
cycle.
upcoming year, right.
So the priorities for spending the 10.7 statewide have already been set?
Yes.
But the individual allocations will be brought to us that must fit under one of these priority categories?
Yes, and the priority areas this year, high-quality early childhood education, college and career readiness, teacher and leadership development, technology and innovation.
Thank
And
you.
as a board, you'll begin to work for the 17-18 budget in October, August, October, in that timeframe.
I think another item for that.
This is a somewhat of a tricky thing. First, because BESE manages this funding stream, it is not part of the Department of Education's budget. However, because the Department of Education then gets awarded some of the funds, it becomes part of the Department of Education's budget. So what I would suggest is BESE staff and Ms. Davis must manage their own process, and there's an advisory committee for that process that has to be respected as well. However, I do think that at the August retreat, at least I'll speak for the department, it would be helpful to look at all sources and uses. And regrettably, increasingly, the uses of HE funds at the department are a replacement for a state general fund that has been cut at the department. So it's an important thing to kind of dig in and understand, I think, what available sources there are, what available uses there are, and we're taking another 10% reduction of general fund this year that should factor into that discussion.
Right, and at the risk of being repetitive, you know, for someone like me, I need to have an overview of all of these funding sources and what our total priorities are and how we're going to apportion them among these different funding sources. And that would be very helpful if we have that discussion, hopefully.
I think we'll make sure that's part of our discussion in August. Is there anything else from the board at this time on this matter? If nothing else, do we have any objections to the motion? No objection, motion passes. What is our next item, please?
On page 318, item 8.1, the consideration of legislative reports. The recommendation for Report A is to approve. Report B, receive and authorize.
We can do this with one or two motions. I need a motion, keep in mind we want to approve A and B, receive and authorize.
So moved.
All the above. Moved by Dr. Bophy. Any second? Dr. Jones? Any discussion on this matter? All right, with no discussion, do I hear any objection to the motion? With no objection, the motion passes. Was that our last item?
One more.
One more. Got a little ahead of myself. What's the next item?
On page 340, item 8.2, consideration of a report on the 2016 and 2017 Louisiana legislative sessions. Update for the 2017 session was added to the agenda by Mrs. Edmondson. The recommendation is to receive.
So, Board, you can see that on the last page of your packet there. Do I have a motion to receive this recommendation? Ms. Holloway, a second. Ms. Lewis, any discussion on this matter? You all see that there, and this goes back to the August retreat, Ms. Vosch. I see you looking, something we'll cover in more detail there. Is there any more comments, questions? Are there any objections to the motion? With no objection, motion passes.
No,
Okay.
so are we doing this at the retreat?
Yes.
Okay. Rather than today?
Correct.
Would you consider doing this today? Are you prepared to do that while we have?
Was there a report to be had here today, or just a receive?
Well, a verbal by John of the session. I thought that would be helpful so far. Yeah, if you don't mind. Yeah, okay.
So we're back to considering receiving a report that I will then deliver.
Well, I think we actually received that report,
So I
we've got it,
will
but if you'll give us a quick update.
Post facto
Some
deliver the
verbal report, yeah.
Of course.
Thank you.
Members, the session, the regular session, as you know, is concluded. The legislature is in the final week of a special session. I'll just break it out into policy versus appropriation. From a policy perspective, it was a far less contentious session than I think those of us who have experienced the last 4 or 5 have been. There were important pieces of legislation passed to settle the issue of Louisiana student standards, to create a smooth transition from the old standards to the new standards. There were also significant pieces of legislation considered on other issues. Very, very few education bills ended up making it through the process. However, there were a couple of consequences that you have begun to deal with. One of them includes the Recovery School District's return of 52 charter schools that are Type 5 charter schools to the governance of the Orleans Parish School System. Others that were created include bills to require the teaching of the cursive writing. There were bills that will create greater consideration and stipulations regarding discipline, especially as it regards students with disabilities. But really the largest source of discussion throughout the session was the budget. Up and down throughout the session, education programs were cut and then refunded and cut and then refunded, and unfortunately, as I said here today, I cannot give you confidence that I know where that discussion will end up. Partially that's because of the MFP, the scholarship program, and other funds that go to non-public schools, all of which have been cut. $44 million reduction to public schools, a $7 million reduction to subsidies sent to private schools, as well as a $6 million cut to the scholarship program. Those are still being debated. We certainly can all hope that they end in a better place than they are today. At the same time, the cuts to healthcare and higher education have a significant impact on our graduates. In particular, TOPS, as you know, remains a source of some discussion. Even through yesterday afternoon and evening, there were debates about how the legislature was going to use current revenue that's been raised to try to fund TOPS. And the best estimate that currently is given as the bill makes its way out of the House and over to the Senate is that 2/3 of the current $300 million TOPS obligation will be funded, but that 1/3 will not, in which case the legislature will have to determine, and in some parts has determined, how those funds will be distributed in the absence of that gap. Students' awards will not be what they have been in the past if that gap continues to exist, and that impacts not just students who graduated from our high schools this year, public or private, but also students who have graduated in the last several years and are currently in college. Obviously, that's a significant problem, and it's something that I know, along with the MFP and the scholarship program and the other private school subsidies, we hope all get resolved in the waning days. It seems like it's largely subject to a debate between those seeking reductions in expenditures and those seeking revenue, and I would imagine that that will come down to the wire or something close to it. Certainly happy to answer any questions or have our staff answer any questions. I should tell you that I'm very proud of the work that our staff did this session. Aaron Bendeley led that work for us. Leslie played a major role. Ryan, Nancy Beeben, Beth testified on multiple occasions, as did Joan. It's been a team effort always, and I think they provided the most accurate and balanced perspective that they could in what are typically extremely difficult circumstances. So I thank them for the good work that they did. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for that report, and we'll go over more in the August retreat. We've already passed that motion, so with that, are there any other items of business? No other items of business. This committee is adjourned.